I'd like to talk to you about the continued use of lawfare in Latin America. We have seen similar strategies used to persecute progressive leaders in Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, Honduras, and last year's coup in Bolivia also proved to be a clear example of how legal institutions can be used to undermine political players. What can you tell us about the use of lawfare in Bolivia ahead of today's elections and how that relates to what we have seen across the region?
I think that Bolivia is a special case. It fits more under the classic coup d'etat and the classic political persecution. Of course, there is also, like in the rest of Latin America, a basic lawfare where political institutions are used as only to persecute a specific group or political group and to target specific leaders in order to annihilate a whole electorate in order not to make them participate in elections, like all these cumbersome and obstacles that the M.A.S. party has undergone. But I think that Bolivia will fit more in a regular coup d'etat, perhaps with few specificalities and particularities due that we are in the 21st century. And this is each country has its own characteristics, like we've seen prototypical lawfare cases more in Argentina under Macri, and also right now in Ecuador, this persecution where media and the judiciary, together with other institutions, trying to give a legal facade to political persecution, but trying to appear they are fulfilling with legal formality. But in Bolivia, it's more like an outrageous coup d'etat, where a new putschist government with also allegations of corruption and breaking basic parameters, legal parameters, are trying to manipulate the institutions with no facade at all. But of course, what we see is that this strategy in Bolivia and Brazil and Argentina and Ecuador and also Venezuela in its own way of lawfare, that also has to do with the use of international lawfare in order to create a void and isolate a country. They are all within a geostrategical international strategy in order to persecute progressism in the region, try to annihilate and erase progressism. Of course, we cannot use, or the hegemonic powers in the US cannot use the same strategies they used to use during the 70s and 80s and 60s of the last century. They cannot simply obliterate and persecute and execute, literally execute political leaders. So that's why they made up this genuine new strategy called lawfare. But that would be the geopolitical objective of all these lawfare and persecutions in every single progressive country in Latin America. The objective is to erase progressism, to prevent them from competing in representative electoral elections, democracy, because in a way, liberal conception of democracy is designed in order for their own liberal candidates that will legitimate the domination and hegemonic systems valid. Once new parties, progressive parties that can be an obstacle to the neoliberal economic agendas arise, then they have to get away from the way in order for them to be able to reimpose these electoral and neoliberal agendas. In a way, democracy only works if it fits their hegemonic interests. That's why they came up with this lawfare that, in a way, keeps formalities and the facade of legal persecution that, in a way, doesn't violate human rights. But in practice, we see that what we are witnessing in Latin America is outrageous.
Speaking of lawfare, we kind of see sort of like a combination of what we saw the United States would have done in the 90s, the early 1970s, and combining both strategies, because it was only recently that in Libya they would have been involved in the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, and now we see assassination attempts against President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and then them also being involved in the coup in Bolivia with Evo Morales not only being forced to flee the country, but flee for his life because a similar strategy was to be implemented. So do you think that politicians in Latin America and socialist politicians should be fearful or worried or concerned about these sort of threats from Western powers?
No doubt their life is that they are in danger, and perhaps we haven't seen these terrible situations Libya underwent with Muammar Gaddafi's assassination and with other many violations of human rights. It's also quite interesting to see that once Muammar Gaddafi's son was imprisoned, then all the allegations of the International Penal Court were forgotten. Now the International Penal Court was not interested in appraising and judging him anymore. So once the dirty job of killing Muammar Gaddafi and ousting his presidency was fulfilled. Yes, no doubt that in Latin America, especially certain leaders like Nicolas Maduro, and they also collaborate with his government. Their life is a danger. The U.S. has no problem or controversy in financing terrorist coup d'etats, interventions against Venezuela. So they use like different levels. If the first level, which is like betraying your own party, like Lenin Moreno in Ecuador, works, okay, then the neoliberal agenda is back, the US interests are back, and the IMF is back, then you can keep on supporting that government. If it doesn't work, then you go to level 2, which would be to imprison under very unfair argumentations leaders like Lula da Silva, and then put in place candidates like Jair Bolsonaro. Then level 2 is done, so you keep on increasing the level. Bolivia would be probably the third level, where only through a coup d'etat trying to distort the electoral results of Bolivia in October 2019, then you put in place level 3. And if it doesn't work, then you create violence, as it happened in Bolivia, and also many people were they lost their lives in these riots, and it would have been increased if necessary, if you need to increase the violence in order to impose the interest in that country. That's why Venezuela, since is resisting all these assaults of capitalism, neoliberalism, imperialism, that's why you have to increase the level until you oust, or that's the target they persecute. And that's in Latin America, which we also have to take into account the cultural similarities with the Occidental countries. No? Latin America is the periphery of Christians, they speak Latin languages, they have more or less the same values, they have respected traditionally liberal democracy. So then that's why you use like different levels of intensity in order to impose your agenda, because you think that they are more like us, no? In a white supremacy point of view. But when you go to Middle East, then it's a different story. There, the rules of the games are different, and then you can impose any different methods that have nothing to do with respecting sort of liberal democratic rules, because they are Muslims, they are not our race, they are not our culture, and according to Huntington point of view, the clash of civilizations, anything is justified because the white supremacy there has to play a fundamental role in order to regain the power and the hegemony of imperialism.
Now, Bolivia would have been under socialist rule since Evo Morales would have taken office in 2006. And since then, the country, which was initially one of the most impoverished in Latin America, would have risen Evo Morales' GDP. The country was definitely thriving under this philosophy, and now there's a move towards trying to, with the right, that is, trying to push the country towards sort of right-wing capitalism. But it's not just about capitalism. We've heard a lot of talk about the fact that they don't want the M.A.S. party in power because of racism. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a combination. No? All these arguments are valid. From an economic point of view, Bolivia stopped being, or was in the way of stopped being, simply a dependent third world country. That bothers normally the imperialism, because it's less difficult to tame these countries. Like Bolivia, like its GDP grew from $9 billion to $40 billion. Poverty decreased from 40% to 15% and 50% in extreme poverty. Unemployment decreased 50%. And these things make people more aware, more access to health, to education, less difficult, less easy to manipulate. And at the same time, so that was done not by a white Chicago boy that studied in the US. No, it was done by an Indian origin president. And this is always, of course, something that bothers a lot to white supremacists, because over our countries always there is a focus that it has to do a lot with racist supremacy. So I think that it's a combination of all these factors that also bother a lot. On the one hand, you had a socialist leader, and at the same time, he came from dark origins.
Why do you think this administration, this regime, was so eager to accept observers from Western countries, the European Union, the OAS, but not ones representing Latin America?
Well, this has also been the strategy since the very beginning after the coming back of the conservative government. The first thing they did is to dismantle the new regional integrational institutions like UNASUR, ALBA, because that was, again, a way of merging different countries to have a bigger voice, align or getting together the Latin American countries in different forums than OAS, for example, the Organization of American States. And that was also a problem, because it's more difficult to deal with several countries than deal with single small countries. No, it's not the same to deal with UNASUR than to deal with Bolivia itself. So in a way, also the traditional forums of regional integration or regional disintegration, like the Organization of American States, even the United Nations or other forums or the European Union, were very interested in first being present in Bolivia, because also their empathy, their sympathy is with the conservative government. So in a way, if this, like, look, for example, what happened with the results of the Bolivian elections. Now, in the last minute news is the electoral institution has decided not to give preliminary results, and so the results will be announced officially on Tuesday, probably. If that would have happened a year ago when M.A.S. was in place, that would have been the first and only reason to trigger the coup d'etat. But now, because they did it, all the international observers are okay with it. So, in a way, they are going to support, unless the human rights violations are too obvious and impossible to cover, anything this government and the institution in place that are a coup d'etat institution, that they have been collaborating with the coup d'etat that happened in the year 2019, last year, they are going to support it. So in a way, that's why they have all the ground to be present there. And the reason why they are also supporting them is because ideologically, both of them, regional institutions like the Organization of American States, the observance of the European Union, they are liberal. So they are very much alike the current government and the conservative candidates in the country. But at the same time, they were very critical with Evo Morales because Evo Morales was for them an obstacle, like all the progressive countries. Their policies concerning natural resources, the sovereignty over transnational companies. All those measures that were also taken during Evo Morales' government were also they bother very much these institutions. That's why they were very critical with Evo Morales. And that's why they will be still, as observants, very critical with Evo Morales and the M.A.S. as soon as they have a chance, in order, of course, to benefit their own candidates that are the liberal, conservative, and even radical rightish candidates in Bolivia.
Yeah, I mean, these elections were delayed, Fernando, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I mean, for many, it's a surprise that they even had it today. Now, the regime would have blamed COVID-19 for the delay, but we've seen elections happen across countries in Europe, the Caribbean, the Middle East. What is the real reason, do you think, that this de facto administration would have tried to delay these elections consistently?
I think that is the uncertainty of the results. In a way, they want to tie up the results to benefit their own candidates, establishment candidates, no matter there are few options. Of course, for the establishment, always Mesa, the white Mesa, Vice President of Goni, would be the best option, the most reliable from a liberal traditional point of view. But any rightist government is better than a progressive candidate for sure. And then the uncertainty of these results, I think, was a reason to delay over and over. Of course, also the guarantees were not completely assured. They are still not, because the COVID-19 is still there in Bolivia. But I think that now they have felt more secure that the margins could be small enough in order to be able to manipulate if manipulation is needed. That would be my negative guess, my conspiracy theory guess. Hopefully, I'm wrong, and there is a massive support of M.A.S, and that will be impossible for the establishment to cover the results and has acknowledged in the first ballot round that M.A.S wins the election with over 10 points over M.A.S, Arce, 10 points over Mesa, no? But that would be the reason why I think that they have delayed constantly 3 times now the celebrations of the elections.
I mean, earlier you mentioned natural disasters in Bolivia. There would have been around 120 fires just in August, coming down to the end of the year. This government has been criticized in comparison to Evo Morales, who would have done very well to quell the blazes in 2019. What are your thoughts on how these de facto authorities would have managed the environment in Bolivia?
This the de facto government has been a disaster, and everybody says that. That's also a reason why they have to call for elections, and they could not delay the date anymore because things were getting very wrong. And that also can play against the establishment itself, because the more Agnes will be as a president, the most disaffection with democracy and with this government, it's going to less support from people, and more people probably will turn back again to Evo Morales and to M.A.S party. So I think that they are dealing very bad. The increase of poverty has been something that again is very difficult to cover at the moment. The increase of unemployment, the decrease of the economy in general, and the increase of the economical crisis at the same time due to the COVID-19, of course, because it's a global pandemic, but at the same time because of the incapability of the government to put in place any kind of economic measures. Like people are suffering very much. So I think that again, this is, and in a way you can say like you have been ruling during the last year. Things are not going to change much once other right-wing candidates are elected. You are simply getting Bolivia to the abysm. So people are realizing that this is happening, and of course, there is a huge level of propaganda in the country that always tries to benefit M.A.S as an alternative to the current situation and the state of affairs. But again, many people are like it's happening, or like it has happened in many of the governments that were ruled by progressive governments, and then the right-wing parties won the elections or implemented the coup d'etat. People realized like we were much better before. No matter if you try to convince me of something different, we want back our dignity that we have been losing. We are losing jobs. We are. It's less difficult to survive. It's less difficult to access health, especially now in this very vulnerable situation we are undergoing in during COVID-19 times. So what is happening also is that people realize that despite the propaganda, they have experienced better lives before, and that's why they want to turn their backs to progressive candidates. And that's something also that it's very, very dangerous for these right-wing parties that has been also trying to create highest atmosphere and environment of polarization in order to try to annihilate again politically the progressive governments. Is not working, and people are going probably now to show the politicians and institutions that despite lawfare, despite persecution, these progressive forces are as alive as always, because people were living much better lives just a year ago. Economic stability, political stability, their regular lives, access to education and health. It's really, really terrible what is happening. And it's in small, routine examples, like people who have diabetes and that has poor people that has regular access to medicines paid by the social security system, and those were achievements, simple achievements of these countries, and now they have no access to medicines, and they are either dying or in a very precarious situation because they are not these medicines, and this is something simply that cannot be stand anymore by these poor people.
I mean, you mentioned people dying because of a lack of medicine. More than 8,000 Bolivians would have passed away as a result of COVID-19. And then we have this coup regime purchasing overpriced medical equipment and respirators. I mean, really just shortening the country's already low medical supplies. Now, another Latin American country that will soon head to the ballots is Ecuador. We have seen the administration of Lenin Moreno take a similar roadmap as Bolivia's de facto regime did before these elections, even floating the idea of delaying February's ballots due to the pandemic. Do you think, Fernando, we can expect more similarities between Bolivia and Ecuador as February approaches?
I think so. There are many similarities, in fact. Perhaps the main difference between Bolivia and Ecuador in the change of regime, a progressive regime into a right-wing regime, was that Bolivia was a classic coup d'etat, and in Ecuador was one of the most astonishing political betrays in history, where people have voted for the continuation of the citizens' revolution process, and Lenin Moreno just turned to a neoliberal agenda. But during these last 3 years of Lenin Moreno's government, it has been amazing how this pure lawfare has worked. Like the movement of citizens' revolution, which is no doubt in the country the biggest political force, like M.A.S, is, according to all the different surveys, the first political force, has, during these last 3 years, after the political party they had, was stolen by Lenin Moreno with the help of the lawfare of these institutions trying to give the appearance of legal procedures to this ransack of the political party of Rafael Correa, did not allow afterwards the creation of a new party to this political force. So during 3 years, they were unable to create a political force, being the first political force in the country. Then what happened is that they could align with existing political platforms in order to present themselves to the last year local elections. And this year, what has done again the National Electoral Committee is to forbid the political party that did this alliance with the political force of El Correísmo being the first political force in the country. So what they had been forced to do is to do another alliance with another party that has been also observed. And it seems that they were the two candidates for the presidency and the vice presidency of Correísmo will be allowed to run for the presidency in February. But the obstacles, difficulties, the energy that this force has wasted in trying to defend themselves to be able to run for the elections is so big that they don't have time to design a political campaign as such, because everything was trying to be able to run for the presidency. So in that sense, the law has been really, really meticulous against this political force, and there is no doubt that they are ahead in the ballots. And also, as it happens in Bolivia, in that sense, again, similarities, all the parties, all the establishment, all the media continuously attacks the Correísmo, trying to erase them from the political race. And I think that the closer we go and get the date of the celebration of the elections in February, we will see more and more probably obstacles and violations of the electoral and political rights of this party, because again, the establishment in Ecuador is also very afraid of the coming back of the Correísmo into power. Because again, if today, right now, as I was telling you in the beginning, Argentina and Mexico are like two isolated countries, but once Bolivia and also Venezuela, and also in a way these three countries are not being able to work together. We've seen some discrepancies in some political actions between Argentina, between Venezuela, but imagine that now also Bolivia goes back into the progressive trade. Ecuador goes back into the progressive trade. Things again, this will be again like a big conjunction of different countries probably working together. That will weaken the Lima group, that will weaken the radical positions of the Organization of American States against Venezuela, that will weaken, no doubt, the positions of the European Union and the US and supporting Juan Guaido. So things will change. So again, this cannot happen. I think that if we see, we have the chance to see several countries with progressive government working together, they will probably will not commit the same mistakes they did during the first decade, during the first years in power. So this changes a lot again the situation in Latin America, and again will have also consequences in the Occidental countries. Will have also at the global geopolitical level many consequences, in which are the roles and the game that the big powers are playing: Russia, China, the US, So I think that these small movements, is the chaos theory, these small movements in Bolivia, these small movements in Ecuador are really, really important for the interest of the hegemonic and the neoliberal agendas that have to be fulfilled according to their interests.
Thank you so much for joining us, Fernando, and giving us your thoughts on what is taking place in Bolivia. It really was an insightful conversation.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Fernando Casado, political analyst.